Andrew, it's so good to be with you. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be with you, Brian. Appreciate the time to discuss this.
Absolutely. You hung in there with me. We've been in talks for months now, but my studying for the bar exam, I had to cut off all guest hosting for that time because I couldn't give any guests the attention they deserved. And I've been hanging in there trying to keep some solo episodes going for the audience, but even those fell off. So I'm back. It's great to be back. And it's really great to be back with you. Seriously. So,
well, thank you. And I said it privately, but a public congratulations, because that's a huge thing to,
it's my second time taking the bar exam. I hope I pass this time. I worked a lot harder this time, but as we said privately, it's a tough challenge, man. And it's a different test every time, and mad respect to all the other people taking it. We'll find out in a couple months, but I feel this time I do feel that I am closer to use the word bar incorrectly in this case. It raises you to a certain bar, right? You have to work us to us. Yeah. This is actually really relevant to part of this message in the book. To achieve something of worth, you really do have to work hard. And in my case, I've been a little too lazy for a little too long. Getting into law school was a huge breakthrough for me, but to work hard enough to be in a position to pass the bar exam, even though I was close the first time, very, very hard. Takes a lot of work. So that's why I say to all the other people that have done it and are doing it, all the respect, because it's a challenge. So this is a theme in the book. Well, let me first start out by saying my thoughts on the book. Beautifully written, gorgeously written, highly recommend it to anybody, everybody, no matter how you feel about race relations in the country or the culture war, quote unquote. This is worth reading. It will provoke your thoughts. And my thoughts are, other than I thought it was gorgeously written, and I think I'm inclined to agree with it with where I'm at right now, because so many of the people I've connected with since starting this podcast, particularly since joining X when it was just Twitter at the time, just a couple of years ago, and promoting the podcast, I've connected with a lot of libertarians, right-wingers, and I don't mean to use that term pejoratively, right-wingers, people on the right. And you hear a lot of this argument, even from many black intellectuals on the right. Hey, this critical race theory stuff, which we'll get into if you want, all this culture war stuff, this black people need special attention and this, that stuff, it's not helpful, it's wrong, and it's actually harmful. So in a sense, this book is really a nice presentation, a beautiful actually presentation of those what are typically considered right-wing points nowadays, which are that black people don't need anything special. This is what Clarence Thomas is well known for, again, many black intellectuals. Just leave us alone. Leave us alone. It's not to say that injustices weren't done to black people. It's not to say that. It's not to say that we need to erase slavery from our history. It's not to say that we're going to stop teaching the ugly parts of our history. No. It's just that it's about, and this is so much what the argument about CRT is, which is, again, the subject of your book is very related to CRT, but not really necessarily. But just in so much of the discourse today, people think you have to be actively anti-racist, or, so my thoughts on the book are, I loved it, highly recommend it. Really, I mean, so much to talk about. We will, but it's these positions feel right wing these days. So, are you on the right, sir?
Yeah, I would definitely say I come from the right.
You do.
Yeah, a lot of work to be there, because I tend to be pretty critical with data sets. And
interesting.
For me, here's what drives me. About 20 years ago, went through an exercise. I do leadership development for senior executives. So in that process, there was a friend of mine who had a who are you kind of journey you could take. It was a weekend seminar, and you did all these kind of assessments and interactions, and you wrote a whole bunch. And at the end of that, ideally, you got one word that describe that kind of your passion, what drives you, what makes you want to do what you do. And everybody had different words, and my word came up, liberator. I've worked in over 40 countries, and coming from the most prosperous, the freest, I looked around the world and went, wow, there is a lot of oppression. And this oppression, 99 times out of 100 is man-made oppression. It's not, wow, you just don't have in and of yourself in your environment, you don't have the opportunity. It's a created environment that limits people to what they can be. And seeing
self-limiting beliefs.
Well, yeah.
Or are they community imposed beliefs?
Well, interesting you say that, because it's really insightful. Because over
of course it
there,
is. That's what I do.
Yeah. Over there, it's very easy to say, you have no running water. It's hard to grow food. You don't have electricity. And I go out to the rural areas many times when I'm there. So I'm not.
Well, now I feel a little bad for saying to someone who doesn't have running water, hey, your beliefs are self-imposed. But
well,
but tell me.
I came here and saw people in the same state, except they had electricity and running water and all, but they had that same aura of, it's hopeless. What's the point? Why even try? I can only do so much. And I look at that and go, okay, I just came from a world.
You look at these guys who are spoiled. You see spoiled Americans.
Yeah. I came from a world where somebody go, seriously, cut my right arm off if I could be in America.
Right.
And here are all these people in America talking about how horrible it is. So that's where I went, these are self-imposed. So now I feel like, hey, you got this being created in the image of God, and they want, there's something unique. So I look at you, Brian, and I go, you're the only Brian, right? I could travel around the world. I could go up and down through history. You're it. There may be somebody with your same name, but not you. You have unique DNA, experiences, education, all kinds of things that makes you who you are in this moment. And that uniqueness,
I just got chills. No, I'm just kidding.
That uniqueness has a purpose. I really believe it. Yeah. And to the degree that things get in the way of that purpose, that's where I go, I want to help. I want to help get rid of that stuff that binds people to the point at hand, puts them in chains from being what they could be.
No, so amazing. So the entitlement that you talk about in one of the chapters here is really in terms of when you have someone who feels entitled to something, that's when you really have them. That's when you really have, that's when you own them. And people are owned in this case, at least in the level we're talking now, when you see the entitlement for people in America who are feeling like victims, and maybe they are to some extent, but they have so much going for them being here just by having running water. You see people who are in America, at least, limited by perhaps nothing but their own beliefs.
Yep.
Which are, as I said in the beginning, informed by real history and real trauma and real, experiences. But on balance, the argument that you present is very much an argument on the right, which is, hey, bootstraps, let's go. You can do this. You are special. You're valuable. You better believe that. You must believe that. And if you do believe that and you have running water, you're going to be okay. And the government and the bottom line is, well, let's back up a little bit. How did you become interested in race relations? Now, I see you have a leadership background, and so it makes a little more sense now. You want to liberate people, and I guess you're looking at society and saying, hey, we've got this problem. Is that what it was? You're just saying, hey, with my leadership background, tell me why you started thinking about this.
So as far as background, I started a company back in the early 90s, grew that. It was sold in 2001, technology company. During that time as well, I would travel overseas both for work, and I just have a heart for this, to help start orphanages, clean water treatment, churches, training facilities, education schools. So I wanted to do that not by living off people's donation, but being a tent maker, so to speak, to use a biblical term. And
what was the term you said?
A tent maker. So that's what Paul the apostle, he didn't take donations from people. He actually made tents and sold them to support the work he did. And that was a model. I said that I like that model, mainly going back to Liberator, right? It gives me the ultimate freedom.
Right.
I'm not beholden to someone's donation.
Right.
They can help. They can help pay for this water treatment thing. That's great, but they're not paying me. And that was important to me. Anyway, through that time, I traveled a lot of places, and I remember, especially in Africa, been to a number of countries in Africa repeated times. And there, especially when you're in the middle of nowhere, you're very acute to, can I trust this person? Are they honest? Are they trustworthy? Do they have my back? And if I tried to make color something, I'd be spending so much energy where it doesn't matter, because no one looked like me. So for me, it was the Martin Luther character of the heart. And I remember coming back, and we, at the time, our offices were part of an office building that had another company in there. And this person was a very early edition or early version of a DEI person today, right? Their job. And he came in to my, I thought this was kind of funny. I'm sitting there, I'm back in town. I just had 4 weeks in Kenya. I usually do 1 or 2 weeks. I had 4 weeks in Kenya, came back, glad to be back, tons of work to do. Said to my admin, hey, I can't see anybody for a couple days. I'm in there working, and he just walks in my office, and she comes and said, I'm sorry, I tried. I said, it's okay. It's okay. And he said to me, I hear you just came back from Africa. He was a black man. And I said, yeah, I did. He walks around my desk and starts massaging my shoulders. And he says, I have a lot of white friends who say, hey, I have a black friend, so I'm not racist. And they don't realize how racist that statement is. And he left.
That's very...
And I remember sitting there going, I forgot. I'm supposed to think in color now. I'm back in the United States.
And you're his boss.
Well, he works for a different company that's also in this building.
Okay,
he and
gotcha.
He and I had just made a relationship. Right?
Gotcha.
So in his mind, he's helping me from saying something stupid in the future. He's giving you a little back rub, and he's saying, hey, great job, pat on the back, but don't think you're necessarily not racist just because you went to Africa. Right. That was the message. And be careful. I'll give you the right thing. Don't say this, so you don't mistakenly get in there. Right. You don't have a car. You don't have a free pass to say the N-word, sir. Right. Just because you did all this stuff in Kenya. Right. And if you thought you did, you don't. Yeah. And it was that I went, what is different here? Now, that was 30 some years ago, but it started a journey of my paying close attention, and especially focusing in, here's this Black community that seems to be not only on this treadmill of welfare, dependency, everything's bad, but it's getting worse. We're dumping more money, and it's getting worse. And I'm looking at like Asian communities, even Hispanic communities, and I'm going, it's not happening there. So what is happening? And that brought me to the creation of this. But it was a long journey of piecing it together. The other thing that gave me the insight, I also I did things behind the Iron Curtain, right as the Iron Curtain was falling, and right after it fell. And I watched how dictators would control their people. And so it was a very simple formula. The dictator would create an enemy. Usually the enemy was us, the United States. Create an enemy, constantly make them an imminent threat, then be the savior of that threat, but not a complete savior to relieve the threat, but to perpetuate it. And then now and then, so that's the fear element.
Right.
And with fear, I can long-term control. The intelligence community has used these kind of tactics for a long time. I can long-term control a group with fear. I can short-term get them to do something stupid with anger. So if I can get them angry now and then and riled up, I can get them to do some really stupid stuff short-term. If they live in anger, that turns back on me. But fear is long-term. And it's this, they would make these systems. They each had their own system, but that was the basic formula. There was a small group, inner group, that knew what they were doing. They knew they were using this formula, and it was all a lie. Then you had gradations of, well, I know it's not true, but it really benefits me. I think it's true, all the way out to, no, this is definitely, America's going to come and take us over and kill us all. And that those masses carried out the dictates because they drank the Kool-Aid. And the way you could find out who was who is right as the country was falling, the people that knew they were lying, they're out of the country. The patriots stay to defend the country. And, they're useful, as the communists would say, they're useful idiots to maintain the cause. So looking at that, going, that system seems to be at play here with this community.
So the idea here is that you're a studied man, a man of data, and you're identifying that there is a problem in America, in the Black community, if that's a fair phrase to even, I guess it's the correct term to use, the Black community in America. You're saying there's a problem here. And it sounds like people on the left would have been saying the same thing. Hey guys, there's problems in Black America. And so it seems like there would probably be agreement, unfortunately. Maybe that's not true, but it seems like both sides are saying, yeah, no, there's something going on with this group, as you say. And the question is why? And there's disagreement on the cause then?
Yeah. So here's the data pieces. And Thomas Sowell's done great work on this. I'd say to anybody who's listening, if you want a deep dive into data, grab any of Thomas Sowell's books. He'll go through all the data points. The Black community was rapidly rising out of poverty. If you just measure it from 45 to 65, there was, they dropped almost 40% out of poverty, or rose up 40% more out of poverty. That stalled after 1965, just a very gradual increase. So what happened right there, that this rise out of poverty under all these horrible conditions, Jim Crow in the South, but in the North, kind of acceptable. You could discriminate, but it wasn't, there were laws against it, but society did discriminate. How is it that Black communities are rising out of poverty without the
against all odds? Against all odds.
And now we know the data is intact family that has each other's back, tight woven community, desire for high character, to be an individual of high character. What happened? In the mid 60s, we had equal rights, which was championed. More than 80% of Republicans championed it. A whole bunch of Democrats didn't want it. equal rights. They voted against it. It passed because of so many Republicans saying we need this. Now go to affirmative action, and Republicans are going, no. In fact, they stopped it from becoming law. Affirmative action is an executive order, basically, still to this day under Johnson. But the Democrats wanted, and you're going, how can these, to the point in the book, how can a former KKK member who voted against equal rights back then as a senator all of a sudden now be championing
and the logic,
affirmative
and so,
action?
and the logic, the overarching thesis of the book is the racists who could not hold back the forces of equality said, okay, if this dam's going to break, then we're going to carve a little path for the water to flow to make sure it works nice and good.
Wow, great. Yeah, great
Right?
analogy. That's exact. And so looking at, again, comparing it to dictators around the world who had successfully oppressed people for decades, looking at this unique community, the Black community, and how they uniquely are suffering. How did this suffering come about? And ergo, the book. And yeah.
So progressive policies are Trojan horses in this theory for enslavement. They're metaphorical chains of enslavement. So, and today we're at a point where the family is very much viewed as a fascist, and it's an incorrectly used use of the word fascism, I think. But family, all these things that you say the data says are necessary for thriving communities and individuals are damn near shunned upon. I mean, I know it sounds conspiratorial to say that, but I damn near feel comfortable saying it. It's so widespread. This and this is what I became so aware of it studying CRT. It was, no, this culture, they call it white hegemony, white power built in, this idea of a family, this idea of working hard. These are now white values. And look, maybe to some extent it is fair to call them white values because we are talking about cultures and degrees of assimilation. And yes, ultimately, the prototypical culture for America comes from a country that had white people, right? So maybe on some level, it makes perfect sense to say, white Protestant values, that whole thing. Okay. But are those values really white, or did they just work for those people who happen to be white? That's kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, exactly. Those values work for whoever employs them. So look at Africans that come to the United States, look at Caribbean island Blacks that come to the United States. They're statistically wildly more successful than Blacks who grew up here.
Because they tick those boxes: nuclear family, education, church, local support systems.
So if you want a group of people dependent on you to give them what they need, the family is the first core. If you're not looking to your family, meaning I'm a father taking care of my children, I'm teaching them what it is to be taken care of. As I get older, they'll end up taking care of me. Nothing's forced. I want to love them this way because I love them. They want to love me this way because they love me.
This is a self-sustaining unit.
Right. And that core, if that's in place, government can't penetrate that. Right. Meaning government can't get in there and say, I want you to treat each other this way. They have to break it up. And that's what they've done.
Vivek has hit that theme. Vivek has gone deep and not shied away from it. I don't know how closely you were following him in the primary.
I love Vivek.
Yeah, he's awesome. But this idea of the family, it's somehow become really antagonistic. And I saw it firsthand in what was far more controversial, and the material was controversial while studying CRT. The reactions from the young students, I was 10 years older than them. It was the only one with work experience. Not to say that I'm wise, but I had a little more experience, and their reactions were very frightening. And they very much feel like the third and fourth generation that you reference in your book. They're talking about family as if it's a white concept, if it's a settler concept, it's a bad thing. And there is a movement to actively erase these things and neutralize them in the name of equality, equity, and that culture war. This is the culture war we're talking about. And you can throw we don't need to go down the transgender route right now, but all these challenges to basic assumptions, it's some legitimate, some maybe have without any legitimacy, but there is a real culture war going on right now, right?
You bet.
Yeah.
And it's again, seeing what I've seen over the years and watching what's happening, you're going, there's some intentionality behind the destruction of this. Circling back to how you opened with that concept of entitlement, I can keep you discontent, meaning if we go back to the Greek philosophers, right? So you had Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. The thing that Plato kind of brought to us, his big concept takeaway was, hey, we're trying to build the perfect whatever. And he used a chair. We keep rebuilding chairs because in our mind, there's like this perfect chair. We just can't find it. And so he argued that is an argument for there's a heaven because we're all trying to find this perfection we can't get here. Aristotle sprung off of that and said, actually, you can maybe touch into heaven now and then here, because really, if I ask you the question, hey, Brian, why do you do the podcast? Why do you do the podcast for X? And so why do you want X? Or why do you work your job? I work my job to make money. Why do you want to make money?
Eudaimonia?
Yeah, eudaimonia. Yeah.
I took a course in Aristotle in college.
Yeah, perfect.
Is that where you're getting to? You can tap into the heaven by reaching for that joy, by striving to be your best self. Is that where you're going?
Right. That's right. And how you attain that is this: in an environment of freedom, you find this balance. So you're not overdoing anything, you're not underdoing anything, but you're finding who am I uniquely and living that out. And even for a moment, you might touch this eudaimonia, which is good spirit, right? Dominia, spirit, so good spirit, Greek. That eudaimonia is attainable for us. And so we're all trying to find a life here. All kinds of religions talk about the life later. But if we really were honest, we're going, no, here, I'm hoping that here something good can happen too, that I can be at peace and content and feel good about myself and what I do and all these things, eudaimonia. He's saying that happens when things are in balance. I can keep you out of balance with entitlement, because with entitlement, I rob you of the one thing that actually makes you happy: thankfulness. If you're not thankful, you are not happy. And with entitlement, think of this: you never get what you were supposed to get, and that's in the forefront of your mind constantly. And it's funny. I fly a lot, so I get bumped up first class a lot. And the person sitting next to me on a flight was really frustrated with the service and the quality of the snacks and in their mind, hey, I'm in first class. I'm entitled to something. And as we're walking through it, there's that balance of, yeah, the service may not be as good as it could be or whatever, but this is awesome. I mean, what's happening right now is really nice. And you're missing it by focusing on what you don't have. And that robs
it's a corruption of the spirit.
Yes.
To feel like I deserve perfection. And this is so deep and perfect because it ties into one of the main reasons I did start this podcast, why I called it Searching for Political Identity. Obviously, it's a deeper search for identity as well. And I don't think I shared this with you, but it ties perfectly into a point I definitely wanted to talk to you about, which was, is the progressive mentality destructive? Coming from a family of progressives, my dad, who's a really great guy and has a great heart and a really good man. And, I'm very proud of him and I love him. But if I'm being honest, you grow up and many times you look at your dad, you go, would I have done that the same way? Or is there, a sense in which maybe he felt entitled even though he was wronged as a child and wasn't able to transform his trauma and pass it on to us and our family and our relationship. And this in the back of my mind, do I really want to be like him, even though he's so well read, he's so passionate, he's so compassionate, wants the best for everybody, like the junior senator in your book has the best intentions, this progressive. But is there a corruption in that mindset where it's an unbalance, it's not healthy? And if it was healthy, there would be a realization that no, these are chains, man. You with your big progressive heart trying to prove something with your entitlement and your pain and your trauma, is that the type of person that is an unwitting enslaver?
Yeah. Oh, well said. Yeah. I think ultimately when you think of it at the simplest level, if I have 4 kids, they're in their 20s now, but as they were growing up, if I gave them whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, what kind of adult would they be?
Right.
I remember I had 3 boys, 1 girl, and the boys would help me with different projects around the house. And I would purposefully do this. They finally caught on, but I purposely do. Hey guys, we're going to do this project and we're going to accomplish X.
Right.
They'd work hard, sweating outside and everything. We'd accomplish X. And then I'd say, oh, there's one more thing. We need to do Y. Wasn't a lot, but it was a little more. And you could see they're trying to retain their frustration and still speak nice to me. And I remember one of them started singing Les Miserables, look down, and look him in there, because he was funny. Like, what is going on? But they finally caught on. Hey, in life, you're going to think it takes this much energy to get somewhere. It's going to take more. And if you
thought you were entitled to just do what was obvious in a given moment, you didn't think life was going to backhand you.
Right. And so I'll do it gently in a controlled environment,
right? Because
life won't. And I'm sure you, with taking your legal exam, trying to do the bar there, I'm sure you ran into a whole bunch of unplanned things that made that harder than what you initially thought passing the bar would be.
Right.
Right.
There's always challenges. Even, my boss on the construction site, always on the site level, always says, there's always something you always have something going on, and ownership and maturity and growth. And, one of my good friends, I have the great pleasure of knowing a guy named Jay Ferrugia. Renegade is his brand. I think you'd really be interested in him. He's, tapped into that profession of coaching, of executive coaching and men's fitness mostly, but mindset, all of that, ownership.
Yeah.
And
if somebody came along to you and said, hey, Brian, look, there's some wealthy people, they actually hire folks to take the test for them. It's all a scam and everything. You're just being stupid for studying. Right. You shouldn't study. This is all rigged against you. Why are you even trying? Now, one person saying that to you, you might be able to go, hey, screw you. I know what I want. I know what it takes for me in my situation to get it done. And I'm going to go get it done. But what if you lived in a whole world where that's the only thing you heard? You would eventually start saying, why even try?
We're taking it back to race relations, for lack of a better term, in America, and this bitterness that has developed potentially among some in the Black community, and this feeling of hopelessness, and this is where it comes back to CRT, where yes, if you really believe that there is tremendous injustice happening today, that it must be transformed. And how do you transform that? You transform the building blocks of society. These are oppressive. All these things that you say, the data says, are necessary for success. Well, they get viewed as, they're corrupted by this entitlement, this negativity. Those building blocks then get viewed as oppressive obstacles that must be transformed. CRT is the tool to transform them. Pick any domain of society, and it's like, no, there's white hegemony there. It must be transformed. And so many on the right are fearing that we're going to lose what made this country great, and they get labeled as racist. And that's why MAGA gets labeled as racist. And I'm lately have been saying, hey guys, I never voted for Trump. I come from the left, but I never liked identity politics. And this idea that if you're not actively anti-racist, you are racist. Man, we are in a tough spot right now.
We are. And the data is pretty clear on this too. The minute you leave a system of merit, so you no longer have a meritocracy, meaning people are going to watch Brian's podcast based on how well it's executed, how entertaining it is, how informative it is. That's why they're
Unfortunately, yeah, you got me thinking now.
But if the government steps in and says, hey, you all need to watch that or you're going to get taxed more, or you're going to get, now for you, woo, right? But for everyone else, it's like, well, I'm not interested in that topic.
Yeah.
Right. So the minute you depart from a meritocracy, you get one of two things, many times both. A system of nepotism, meaning my friends and family, if I have the power, my friends and family are the ones who get the positions, the coveted positions, and it always ends up in tyranny. The only way to make a non-meritocracy work is to force it by the point of a gun, ultimately. So that's where this whole movement and what we've done with this community, now it's kind of spreading out to society, but they're still being used as pawns.
Right.
As pawns to destroy a country. And here's the sad thing. I mean, the Soviet defector from the 80s, he gave a long interview about how this system of control works, how to spin it and make it work. And part of what he said is all these people, like all the ones protesting and everything, once the system collapses and you install a totalitarian rule over it through laws and regulations, those people are the first ones rounded up and either jailed or killed, because in their mind, there's this idea of utopia, and they're the ones who are going to realize the quickest there is no utopia. And they're going to end up being the ones now protesting against the new system. So we just got to get rid of them because they were useful idiots. They got us where we needed to go. And now we no longer need them for anything. And I really feel for these young people who have only been exposed to one message about what is right and how the world works, and have ignored this message of, I would call it a message of meritocracy that
traditional American message.
Right. That you're given, Brian's given gifts and talents and skills. And the more he uses those, i.e. podcast, studying for the bar, the more he uses those, the better off the world will be, the better off he'll be, the better off the world will be.
So it seems to me that we're talking about two different things. One hand, it's the enslavement, metaphorical enslavement, intellectual enslavement, but potentially very real enslavement of the Black community through government programs, affirmative actions. And then we're talking about, and I want to stay on that for a second, and then we're also talking about how that's spilling over to society at large now and maybe being used to change America. Sticking with the first one for a moment, why do you think, if we take your assumptions to be correct, that this was done intentionally by people who couldn't stop equality from washing over society, so they thought, okay, we'll trigger these feelings of entitlement and we'll make Black people feel like they should be receiving special government benefits that will deprive them of their agency, of their will, and they won't rise up, and they'll be simmering. We'll control the height of the flame, to borrow a phrase from the Middle East type of thing. Why that? If we assume that this argument is correct, what is to be gained? I know in the book you explain it, but can you tell me?
Yeah, my personal power. So if I'm the one in power, i.e., congressman, senator, president, bureaucrat under that structure, if I'm the one in power, there are lots of benefits to being a senator and a congressman. And benefits of wealth, benefits of connection, benefits of fame. And if I can take a small group, make them dependent on me, and get their vote and guarantee my place, hey, too
So
bad for you guys.
it comes down to raw, I'm going to use a really arguably inappropriate plantation politics. We want these people voting. These are just voters that I can snatch up. So it's owning their votes.
Exactly.
This is the logic for why the family, the church, and money, the pursuit of money, all of that is being eroded so that they're dependent on government and vote for us.
And there's ancillary people involved in that. Spokesmen who go around and say, hey, I'm going to propagate the narrative of white privilege, and here's my book, have me come speak to your group. That's a whole economic fame structure there outside of the government. And I look at them, this is how I know it's all just crap, because there are more Africans enslaved right now than were ever enslaved in America. Right now. And I don't hear them saying anything.
Right.
There are more white women enslaved in the Middle East now than blacks ever enslaved in America. So if slavery is so horrible, where's the voice and the energy around?
You know what they say? Those people would say, but American slavery was different. It was chattel. It was ownership. Pure. It was property slavery. It was ugly and grotesque on a different.
There are groups. There are groups that will enslave, and they're enslaving a lot of Asian females and white females. They get the white females mostly from Eastern Europe now, Asians a lot from China and some from Thailand and Laos, and they entice them with different, hey, you're going to be a domestic servant, or you're going to be we're going to actually put you in a movie. And so there's all this excitement, plus massive abduction. And that's why if you look at abduction history or abduction data among Eastern European women and Asian, all the numbers are up. The point is this: they're simply used as early as 8 years old, all the way up to about 22. They're used as sex slaves. And when they're done with them, they kill them and sell the organs. So this is a brutality that's happening right now on a mass scale. And it's not, anybody can go and look this stuff up. This isn't top secret data points. But what I'm saying is, so you're sitting there saying to a community, look how horrible slavery was to you. It put you in the place you are now, which is a lie. And then ignore the active slavery that's happening and pretend like it's not happening or not care. I go, your issue isn't slavery. It's something else.
What might that be? This is now this is the progressive person. This is a progressive who wants to be seen as having good intentions. Should we give them the benefit of that doubt?
Perhaps, because there are two groups, which is exactly what the book is saying.
Right.
There's that core group of, I know exactly what I'm doing and what I have to do to get the power, the money, the fame, the position, whatever it is I'm after, the control I want. I need to oppress a group and feed off of them. Then there are people who, in their heart, are going, no, I want to help people. I want to be nice to people. I want to be kind to people. I want to give them a hand up. And they're the kind of people that let their kids run wild and don't interject and say no because somehow no feels really wrong and oppressive. Here's the fundamental thing, especially if you look at, we'll go hardcore, Marxism. So you look at Marx, his view of humanity is, look, everybody is good. So if somebody does bad, it's because they're in a bad environment. So if bad things are happening, it's an environment that we need to change. And those of us who are intellectual, we're going to engineer this utopian environment so that good people can finally be good.
Wow.
The Indians have Native American Indians have a great parable that they tell. So the Indian chief at 2 a.m. is standing at the edge of a cliff looking out over the valley. And his grandson comes up to him and he says, "Grandfather, why are you up in the middle of the night? You look so worried." And the grandfather says, "Well, I was awoken again by the 2 wolves. I have 2 wolves inside of me and they're fighting. And one wolf wants me to be kind and helpful and think of others. And the other wolf wants to devour everybody and use them for my own gain and use my position for what I want and not really care about anybody else." And he said, they're fighting and fighting and fighting. And the grandson said, "Well, grandfather, which wolf is going to win?" He said, "The one I choose to feed." And so that's inside of all of these 2 wolves. And you look at any history, Seth and Osiris for the Egyptians, right? Yin and Yang for the Asian community, new man, old man for biblical Christianity. This duality inside of us is constant. And that's where our founding fathers were brilliant with the whole idea of capitalism, which was, if I want to make money, there's nobody to come help me. I have to figure out something Brian wants that he's willing of his own free will to pay me for. So even if I'm a selfish asshole, I still have to get outside of my own head and figure out what Brian wants and deliver that at some level of quality that he'll keep consuming it. So what is that thing? And that's capitalism at the core. We've corrupted it in a lot of ways. And some of the things progressives say about capitalism, I go, yeah, that's wrong. Shouldn't be working that way. But for the most part, that core idea of you got battling things in front of you. So I'm not just going to land a bunch of power on you. I'm going to say, you need to make your own way. And you make your own way by figuring out what do the people around you want. And you figure out how to deliver that. And then you can make money. So that system is brilliant. I mean, it's just a brilliant system. But now we've even vilified the term capitalism.
Oh, yeah.
Without people even knowing what they're saying.
You would have been disturbed by the students in my class. Very much, like I said, that 3rd or 4th generation that you reference in the book that feels like they have only grown up with one side's arguments or at least very sincerely accepted those beliefs. And they don't, billionaires, no, they don't think millionaires should exist. There shouldn't be millionaires. It's just like, man, I don't know. It speaks to a sense of self and a sense of, or a lack of a sense of self. Yeah. Fundamentally.
They're deceived because they've always had, meaning they've always had electricity, running water,
right?
Could call the police, food. How many of them have spent even one day going, where in the world am I going to find food?
You know, it's funny. It's interesting that it's quite possible that the students who think they're on the side of justice and heart and wisdom are actually the ones potentially born from entitlement. They're actually entitled. It's very interesting. But no, the one, I think there was one black student. The professor was a black man, and I think there was maybe 2, but one black gentleman And amazingly, of course, and I found myself playing the role of Ted Cruz, coming from the progressive side of things, just because one, I think the class needed the balance, and two, that was honestly how I felt myself reacting. This was at the time when CRT was in the forefront of the news with DeSantis in Florida. Ted Cruz was talking about it as Justice Jackson was being elevated to the court. So these conversations were happening. So I just ended up doing that. And the one black guy was on the right. He was like, "No, I'm going to be a prosecutor." He wanted to be a part of the system. He didn't want to tear the system down. And there were a couple of it was mostly minority students and a lot of women, but it was fascinating. It was just,
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen it. Well, maybe not, because it may have been a pretty heavy weight on my heart to see
it would have.
people.
I mean, it really that really is why I started this, because just like evaluating basic assumptions and worldviews and all of that.
Yeah, and it's so really what's permeating our society is we've forgotten about the bad wolf, that it exists in everyone. And I remember something my mother told me at a young age.
Yeah, nobody's perfect. It's not just that the white man is evil. Everyone has it in them.
Yes. And my mother, God bless her, she passed away recently.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Phenomenal. Thank you. Phenomenal woman. But she told me early on, because I was judging something a kid did. He didn't do it to me. He just did something. And I judged him in a way, I'm better than him. And she said to me, until you realize you could do anything that's bad, you can't judge anyone for anything.
Wow. And insightful.
Yeah. And I thought, God, could I have done? And as I thought about
7.
Yeah. Well, and as I thought about, because he stole some money from somebody, and I thought, I could steal some money. Right. And so looking even at these horrible dictators and saying to myself, well, why haven't I killed 20 million people under me? Well, I've never had the ability.
Right.
It's not like I was even given the opportunity.
Yes, this assuredness. They sometimes call it self-righteousness, but that they're right on the left. And it's just like, it's a turnoff on the surface level.
It is. Yeah. It is, because and that's what is the ugliest part of, to me, the evangelical church. Now, you probably surmised I'm a person of faith, but when I look at the judgment from the church, they're not all judging, but there are some who do it really well. You think of I don't know if you remember the Saturday Night Live church lady character.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So that stereotype of I'm better than everybody and looking down my nose.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think back to, I find this fascinating. If you think back to Jesus, those were the ones he was yelling at all the time, going, "You are horrible." And you think there's some bad things in store for you to try to that will hopefully get your head straight. But right now, you're wrong. Wow. And that to me is really compelling, because that's what I think these folks are doing.
So do you think now that there's a different, could you write another new chains for the population at large? Do you think there's something intentional and malicious going on nowadays?
Yeah, I think it's matured. I think it's bigger. So you have big world actors. China, Russia, Iran are the three main ones right now that want to destroy us, each for a little different reason, but they want to destroy us. The Soviet Union, the reason Russian mafia are among the most brutal and horrible, if you think about it, you have this deep thinking society. In fact, I remember the first time I went to Russia and I was talking with some Russians in a village, I was stunned at their level of their ability to think philosophically, abstractly.
So you're saying the average gas station attendant in a random Russian village is basically Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, I can. In a sense, my experience, maybe not that level of IQ, but certainly that ability to have a non-tangible discussion like we are now. We're having an abstract discussion, trying to talk concepts into a visual picture for people, right? That's an abstract discussion. A lot of folks can't do that. A lot of third world populations can't do that simply because they were never challenged to think that way. Soviet Union, just lots of philosophical thinking. What was interesting to me is they viewed suffering as a badge of honor, and they thought that when you suffer and you come out still a functional person, I'll say, that shows how great and deep and strong you are. And you Americans never have suffered, right?
Emotional weight training.
Yeah,
psychological weight training.
And there's some truth to it.
Right.
But out of that group, and to be part of the Soviet Party, Communist Party there, you had to profess in atheism. So you adopt this one view of man, this mono, not a dualistic view of man, but a mono view of man. And you say there's no God. When the Soviet Union fell, all the KGB folks and that used to run stuff, they had no job anymore. They became the mafia. They became the ones. And the reason they're so brutal is they honestly go, this life is it. Humans are just an extension of the animal kingdom. There's nothing divine about them. So if a bunch have to die for me to get what I want, no problem. And that is part of the drive out of the former Soviet Union, Russia. That's certainly more where Putin lies in that kind of thinking. So when we look at destroying America, the fact that a whole bunch of lives are going to be destroyed and the world at large will be a much worse place if we collapse, they don't care because they get the power. And I'm really thankful because you talk like this and people go, that seems grandiose and conspiratorial. Right. And I go, well, watch an Auschwitz video. You'll see what we're all capable of. Right. Given the right, the right incentives, the right personal desires. Right. So that ability, and I just feel for these, I feel especially for the Black community, but now that it's permeated into the young community, I'm going, you are destined, back to our original point, you're destined to never be happy because your paradigms do not work in this world. And so because you're the entitlement that you've been handed deprives you of the ability to forgive. Yeah. Well said.
I'm quoting your book. I read the book. Yeah. And that's the key. Forgiveness is the key to breaking free of the victim mindset, which is the key itself to.
I'm so glad you went there. Yeah. So to finish this up and to step into that forgiveness piece.
Yes, sir.
To finish up the idea of I want to do good things. There's a viral video that I think it's been staged. When I watch the acting and I go, I think these guys set it up, but it still makes the point. It's a guy talking about an open border, and if somebody's saying, that doesn't seem right, I go, no, these people should have a chance. And then he brings a person over and says, hey, this is somebody who just crossed the border, and I want to introduce you to this guy because he'll give you a place to live. You can go live with him. And the guy's going, hold on. Right. I'm not saying you can't live, right? Right. And that is, to me, the progressive mindset. I want to be kind with everybody else's stuff, time, and money.
Externalizing the kindness.
Right. And they put it off on this enigma called government and say we could tax people for the kindness. And I go, tons of data to show that's really expensive, very low outcome. The best outcome is you saying, I want to help somebody and go help that person. That's the best outcome. Right. And if you're not willing to do that, I'm not really willing to listen to you to tell a bigger system what it should look like.
Right.
So now moving into forgiveness, which I'm so glad you brought that up. There's been so much hostility sown that to undo it at this point, the only pathway is for people to rise to this place of forgiveness. And it's incredibly difficult.
Right.
But if you don't go there,
especially when that's
changes.
not part of any messaging that you see really anywhere.
No, in fact, it's looked at as weakness. Don't let people take advantage of you. Don't enable people. If you forgive them, you just enable them. And forgiving doesn't mean I trust somebody now, but it does mean I'm not
freeing yourself. It's the way you change.
Yes.
You forgive someone else, that changes you.
You
not
bet.
them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you want to, again, back to this, eudaimonia, you want to be happy, you've got to forgive. If you don't forgive, you're not going to be happy. If you think you're entitled, you're not going to be happy.
Right.
If you live in this mindset of I'm oppressed, I can't do anything, there's no point in trying, you are not going to be happy. And it takes a meritocracy. People are successful because they worked hard.
Well, such a valuable conversation for me, and I'll keep this in mind going forward, not knowing where this ship is going necessarily, although, I'm trending to the right. It's not necessarily going to land there, but if I take anything away from this amazing conversation with you, Andrew, and thank you so much for joining me, is to be in that forgiving mind state, to be grateful, to be positive, to be honest, but to forgive. Because that clears the attic, so to speak, and then you can go forward and discover yourself wherever that lands. And you've presented a cogent, data-driven, experience-driven too argument that the intellectuals on the right have it, but I'm still on my journey. But this is a pivotal conversation. We touched upon a lot of deep, meaningful issues that have been on my mind since I started this journey. So thank you so much.
I appreciate the time to be able to talk about it. Obviously, 100%. It's passionate and meaningful for me. So thank you.
Absolutely, for both of us. So let me hold the book up one time, and of course, I'll post it in the show notes. But phenomenal. I mean, this is the first book I've read in a while through law school and then studying for the bar exam twice. It's like I didn't get much casual reading done in, but this was really a joy to read. You're an amazing writer, man. You're a great writer. We didn't even talk about any of that.
You saying that.
You're a really good writer.
Thank you. And you can see that the author's name is Ivan Freed.
Yes.
There's a poetic piece to that. If you say it fast, I've been freed.
I've been
freed. So
that's amazing. This was a total, there's a million other things we could have talked about, but we came full circle in a sense, and we did a nice loop here, very meaningful about leadership and belief and self-determination. So I highly recommend this book for anyone. I think we did a good job of not getting into all the bits and pieces. So a lot of good reason for people to still read this if they hear this. So, sir, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure, and I'm really glad we did this. So all the best to you.
Thank you.